Hi, it's John and welcome to the channel. It is 6:05 a.m. on Wednesday, July the 9th with the big blue mug of coffee this morning as usual. I hope you're having a great day today. And I wanted to delve a little deeper into the CBC story that continues to grow online. This is the story about Travis Dhanraj, the former CBC employee. He writes this scathing resignation letter, blowing the lid off what actually happens at the public broadcaster. Mr. Dhanraj, a journalist, and I believe that in the true sense of the word, by the way. I think he has credibility. I think he needs to be listened to. I also think we need answers. I've got some questions of the heads of the CBC. The people who work there, the big names on the CBC, need to be asked some questions, although they're being told to shut their mouths right now. And I also think somebody needs to put a microphone in the face of the Prime Minister and ask him whether he wants to continue with the funding, additional funding to the CBC, and continue along with legislation that would put that funding into law in Canada. So the really awful thing about this is you're being propagandized with your own money. But the other awful thing is that there are people you probably know, they're probably your neighbors, who are perfectly fine with this. They run to the CBC for their confirmation bias, and they don't want to hear conservative voices. They don't get it on the CBC. They don't like conservatives. They don't like Poilievre. They don't like what they call Maple MAGA. So they're perfectly fine with this. And this is a very slippery slope, folks, a very slippery slope. So let's go over and just take a look at a couple of articles just out over the last day. Chris Selly will thank Travis Dhanraj for pulling back the curtain on CBC News. Now, Mr. Selly is correct here. But the thing is, we all knew this was happening in the first place. If you're a conservative, you knew this was happening. Just a little bit from his article, he accused the network, credibly it must be said, of performative diversity, tokenism, and perpetuating a system designed to elevate certain voices and diminish others. Dhanraj is brown-skinned and quickly developed a reputation on the Canada Tonight news magazine show for inviting, shall we say, non-CBC types onto the public airways. An appearance by Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley caused particular consternation among those who carry CBC tote bags. And Catherine Marshall, who is representing Dhanraj in a planned complaint to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, alleged this week that CBC management assumed Dhanraj would hold a liberal worldview because of his skin color, and were dismayed when it didn't pan out the way they assumed it would. Pretty awful. And this is your tax dollars, folks. Then there's this from Terry Newman. Dhanraj is a journalist. He doesn't belong at the CBC. A scathing rebuke of other people like Rosemary Barton, David Cochrane, Ian Hannah-Mansing, other people who work there. Mr. Newman basically saying they're not journalists, because if they know about this happening, they're not journalists and they are propagandists for the Liberal government. The thing that really bothered me the other day, this is the article that kind of broke this story a few days ago, was this line right here. Dhanraj's lawyer, Catherine Marshall, said Monday that the CBC didn't want him booking conservative voices on his show. Well, what does the CBC think of itself? And this is the mind-boggling thing. I went online to look up this article, or this document right here. Now, this was released, I believe, in February. It went up on March the 13th on the Government of Canada website, The Future of the CBC. All these people who love the CBC sat down and came up with a plan going forward with the CBC. And Mark Carney is following this to the letter. I just want to go over a little bit of this for you because it's mind-boggling how ignorant it is. Okay. The trust of citizens. This is in the same document. Citizens' trust in public media has also declined in recent years in many countries. In an increasingly fragmented and polarized media environment, they tend to turn to information sources that correspond to their personal opinions and values. I talked about confirmation bias. That's where liberals go, to the CBC. Now, what the CBC is worried about is that people are going to other sources. They don't want you to do that. They want to control the narrative. This phenomenon, combined with the proliferation of false information and conspiracy theories, they, the arbiters of misinformation, the CBC and the government, weakens the position of public broadcasters, which are perceived by some as institutional actors, often biased and ineffective. Moving along here. Now, this is about the funding. And this is what Mark Carney's all about. In Canada, CBC Radio Canada's public funding comes from parliamentary appropriations. These are voted on every year by Parliament as part of the budget process. Through a specific provision added in the Broadcasting Act, the minister would aim to provide sufficient resources to CBC Radio Canada in the long term by establishing a statutory appropriation based on an annual per capita amount. This funding level, based on a per capita formula enshrined in the Act, would provide greater certainty for funding than parliamentary appropriations, which can vary from one year to the next without sufficient notice. Just one more line here. The difference between a parliamentary appropriation and a statutory appropriation is that the latter is enshrined in an act of Parliament that is not voted on annually by Parliament as part of the budget process. And this is what Mark Carney wants. Written into law how much the CBC gets, and I'm sure what they get will only go up, and you can't get rid of the funding just by looking at what's at the budget each year. Basically, that's it. This is what he had to say, and you've seen this video before.
We will not only increase CBC Radio Canada's funding by $150 million, but we will also make this funding statutory, meaning that Parliament as a whole will need to approve any future changes to its funding, not just the Cabinet.
So $150 million more. This is a question he needs to be asked in the wake of Mr. Dhanraj's resignation letter. And then you go over here, and this is an article right here, right from the CBC website, for God's sakes. Another $150 million boost to underfunded CBC, they put. And no doubt that they were, salivating the fact that Carney was going to give them more money. Going back to the document I was just showing you, this is called political environment. They could have called this Polyev political environment, because I think this paragraph was written right here because of Pierre Poilievre. Public broadcasters are also facing political pressures, which can affect their editorial independence in a number of Western countries. The relationship between government and public media is becoming increasingly fraught. Some governments are using their financial authority to put pressure on newsrooms or adopt laws that limit freedom of the press. These attacks are often motivated by ideological considerations and are aimed at limiting the influence of public media, which are either perceived as overly critical of governments or as loudspeakers for government messages. I mean, this could have been written for what Pierre Poilievre wanted: defund the CBC. Publicly funded broadcasters are in a delicate position because of their role in broadcasting neutral, high-quality information. They're often the target of those who want to influence public opinion. Can you believe this actually got written? Their ability to maintain their independence in the face of these pressures is essential to preserve their credibility and legitimacy. Somebody actually thinks this of the CBC. You and I knew differently. Now let's look at some revenue sources here. Okay, this is going back to 2021, 2022. This year, the operating funding was $1.139.7 million. Capital funding recognized in income was $93.6 and working capital $4 million. Government funding, this is your money, $1.139 million. That's $1,139,700,000. Now let's move ahead here. According to its annual report, CBC Radio Canada received $1.24 billion in federal funds in 2022, $1.39 billion in 2021. It keeps going up. And Carney says he wants to give them $150 million more. So I have some questions. I woke up this morning thinking, who are the big names on CBC? Rosemary Barton. How much does Rosemary Barton get paid to spread liberal propaganda? And does she know about this? I looked up online. AI says it's not publicly available. We don't know. And I want to know. I went in David Cochrane. How much does he make? Not publicly available. I want to know. These are two of their biggest names and voices. What are we paying them to advance liberal talking points and to suppress conservative voices? And what do they know about this? That's what I want to know. I want to know if they're aware of this so-called performative diversity tokenism and perpetuating a system designed to elevate certain voices and diminish others, conservatives. Or is this just what they do because it's in their nature? I want to know if some journalists will ask Mark Carney about this. Are you going to hold back on mandating this funding for the CBC in law? Or are you going to give them another $150 million after we've heard this information from Mr. Dhanraj? Or they're just going to attack Mr. Dhanraj? Because that's probably what's going to happen. I also accuse the CBC of election interference. I mean, we see the bias when we watch the CBC. The CBC claims objectivity and neutrality. It's in the document they put out back in February, but we don't believe them, and we knew this was true all along, that they're not objective, they're not neutral. And again, we go back to Terry Newman's article on Travis Dhanraj. He doesn't belong at the CBC because he's a journalist. It doesn't say a lot about Rosemary, Barton, David Cochrane, Ian Hannah-Mansing, if they knew this kind of nonsense was going on. I want to know how long I have to continue to fund this corporation that does not speak for me and takes my money and yours. That's what I want to know. I think this is disgraceful. What do you think? You probably have some additional questions as well. Put them in the comments below. That's all I got to say on this topic today, but it just makes me damn mad that we didn't elect a government that said they were going to defund the CBC. I think it's time we move on. The CBC doesn't want anybody else to have a voice here. They say it in their document. They're worried about independent voices having a say, and they want to keep their voices quieted. And remember this. Let's go back to this right here. Guilbeault is now back in charge of controlling the internet. Liberal. This is only going to get worse. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. I'll see you in the next one.